Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Mark chapter 3. So let's ask the question, what is the blaspheme of the Holy Spirit? What is the blaspheme of the Holy Spirit? And then can you blaspheme the Holy Spirit? If you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, or you are in eternal damnation, excuse me, that you can never ever get forgiveness for. I say that because there are people who have been taught this, and thus there are people who think they have even possibly done it, blaspheme the Holy Spirit. Um, so let's get into it. And and even more so, what's going to be something that's interesting that Jesus is going to confront the phrase the blaspheme of the Holy Spirit comes from one of the most ridiculous statements the Pharisees make. They made many, and this is one of them. Okay, so let's kind of go back, get into it. All right. I'm going to go back just a tad, and get the kind of full setting too, where we left off. We talked about Jesus' family last time, who set out to do a family intervention on Jesus, and we kind of got into why they did that. My biggest question with that, well, let me read it. Then he went home, and the crowds gathered again so that they were not even able to eat. When his family heard this, they sent out to restrain him. They set out to restrain him because they said he is out of his mind. Right? So the biggest question I have, I understand. I understand maybe his brothers. I guess I don't understand the mother, Mary. And the reason why is because she, out of all of them, had uh, ample supernatural revelation of who Jesus is. So that's what kind of, you know, uh, that's what makes that it gives me pause right there. It's just like, wow, okay, wow. Um, all right, so it says the scribes who had come down from Jerusalem said, he has Beelzebub in him, and he drives out demons by the rulers of the demons. Now, ooh, excuse me. Now Jesus endured a lot of he endured a lot of insults by the Pharisees, which kind of you should know that um, when a person loses the argument, that they result to name calling. You know, when they name call, uh, when they name call, okay. And they at one point they called Jesus a Samaritan, which would be in modern terms the N word. Okay, another 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 insult. They called him a fornicator, or a child of a fornicator. I mean, they called him a lot of names. This one is interesting. Is that so? You see Jesus healing. You see Jesus casting out devils. Now, another kind of interesting thing to me is how prevalent demon possession was manifested in and around Jerusalem. That's interesting. Okay. Um, and so they call him Beelzebub. So this term Beelzebub could be another. Um, I'm trying to think here. Um, uh, a fallen angel, certainly a demonic rank. Okay. Um, and so when they call him Beelzebub, he said he has Beelzebub in him, and he drives out demons by the ruler of demons. Okay. So now Jesus says, okay, yeah, all right, let's okay. Ready? Verse 23. So he summoned them and spoke to them in a parable. How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rebels against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but it's finished. So Beelzebub here, in other words, calling him Beelzebub would be like really calling him, Satan, that he's driving out. He drives out demons by Satan. Now, before I get there, let's just look at the logic of what Jesus just said right here. And it's almost like, do I have to respond to this nonsense? How can Satan drive out Satan? Then he says, if a kingdom is divided against itself. Now, what's interesting is that you do see there's a kingdom here. That in the dark regions, there's a kingdom. Satan has a kingdom. He has a rulership. And Jesus is not denying that, but he has a rulership. In Ephesians, we're told that there are principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness. So there is a you could say demonic kingdom, but not demonic. When I say demonic, not the kind of the exorcist kind of movies, kind of demonic, or even what they're accusing Jesus here when these demons possess him, but the rulership of Satan's kingdom that rules the earth, that pushes, that guides the earth in a ungodly path. So he's saying that Jesus is casting out devils by this ruler of um, the dark kingdom, another name for Satan. So then he says, if Satan is casting out devils, how can his kingdom stand? That's stupid, right? So that's the first thing, right? That's the first thing that he says to them. That okay, let's deal with the first stupidity here. Verse 27 says, on the other hand, no one can enter a strong house. No one can enter. No one can enter. No one can enter a strong man's house and rob his possession unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he will rob his house. Okay, so I think there's some revelation here that's very interesting. Well, first of all, there's some, in a sense, common sense explanation here. One, he says, you cannot, using the illustration that if I'm going to rob your house, I would have to first tie you up, because you certainly may not just allow me to tie you up. Rob your house. And I say that because, this is just a thought, a thought by saying that why don't we see or manifest, why don't we see demon possession? Why don't we see demon possession the way it's manifested here in Jesus' day in Jerusalem? I mean, there's a lot of demon possession. So the other question is, why don't we see it today? And of course, there's always a discussion as to the difference between demon possession and then, let's say, the various range of mental illness. Okay. Um, and the difference is that with the mental illness, which is uncontrolled, so things such as epilepsy, seizures, okay, mind, things like that, those things are a little different than what's manifested in demon possession. For example, when Jesus cast out the devils, out of, and they went to, and the pigs went in. So how would you explain that as a mental disease? In other words, there's a clear difference in demon possession. Okay, and since I'll throw this in here too, this nonsense that is called spiritual warfare, deliverance, where they're casting demons out of Christians and having these deliverance services, people throwing up. Nothing biblical about that. But I'm going to say this, just a thought. When Jesus says, no one, the idea of entering the strong man's house and binding the strong man, that is it possible, reason why we don't see the plethora of demon manifestation is because of the presence of the gospel in the world today. Now, I'm just saying this, I can't give you an answer in terms of why we don't see it. And by the way, everybody, in a sense, didn't have that kind of a problem with demon possession back then. In other words, they almost knew, okay, my boy is demon possessed. And what I'm saying is that it wasn't something that it was just, okay, demon possession, mental illness, okay, or even, let's say, autism, something like that. And I say that, to me, that's a different category. And it's just a thought right here. So I'm not saying it's just a thought. So first Jesus says then that, okay, let's deal with the first stupidity of your statement, which is if a kingdom if a kingdom is dividing itself, if demons are casting out demons, then the kingdom won't stand. So that's the first thing. If Satan rebels against himself, he is divided, he cannot stand, and he's finished, right? He won't accomplish his purpose. So then he says, on the other hand, no one can enter a strong man's house and rob his possession unless he first ties up the strong man, then he will rob his house. Now, verse 28, he says, now he gets to this rebuke. I assure you, people will be forgiven all sins and whatever blasphemies they may blaspheme. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin, because they were saying he has an unclean spirit. So now what does Jesus mean by this? Now there are kind of different views on this. As I said, there's people who kind of believe that if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, so now we have to kind of take this in context. We'll get back to that in a moment. But notice Jesus says if you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, if you blaspheme against him, blaspheme against God, you can be forgiven that. But he says when you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, you never have forgiveness, but it's guilty of an eternal sin. Now, why say this? I mean, what's the meaning behind this? And then as I asked the question earlier, first let's define what the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is, and then secondly, can you blaspheme the Holy Spirit? And here's the interesting thing. The question would be, in the context in which Jesus is saying this, I will say that anyone today who thinks they blaspheme against the Holy Spirit has not. I'll get to why in a moment. Anyone who blasphemes God is not committing an unpardonable sin. But let's kind of define then what a unpardonable sin is, as Jesus here is using it. It's going to go back. Here are the Pharisees who were witnessing. They continued to witness Jesus heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons repeatedly. They saw this. And then they want to attribute that to Satan doing it, or Jesus being possessed by Satan. That he's doing these acts by Satan, thus calling God the devil, calling God's works demon. Now, one of the most, I'm gonna say, the closest in an Old Testament example would be when the children of Israel, about 3 months after they came out of Egypt, Moses is up in the mountain, and what do? They said, well, we don't know what's going on with Moses. Then they said, let's build a calf and go back to Egypt. The calf will lead us back to Egypt, right? That was bad enough, first of all, that you would want to go back to your bondage, that you were crying out to God for 400 years. You were crying out to God, and then now you want to go back to Egypt. That's okay. They make the golden calf, and then the idea of the golden calf, the pagan rituals that came out of it was this giant orgy that they gave themselves to. And then what followed worse was this, when they said, this calf is what brought you up out of Egypt. Okay? Excuse me. This calf brought you up out of Egypt. So that, of course, insults of insult. So the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is when God manifests himself, manifests his power. You understand that, and then you say, no, it's the devil. It's the devil. In other words, what other God, deity, ideology had been healing, manifesting healings? You can even say deliverance, casting out devils. So why would you attribute that to Satan? When have, in any point of time, would you have ever said, in any point of time, that Satan was casting out devils? That Satan was healing anybody? So why would the Pharisees then attribute that to Jesus? That their hatred for Jesus was so great, they would even sink to then insulting God by saying Jesus, that God's the gifts that God is manifesting is being done by the devil. That's the blaspheming of the Holy Spirit. That the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is this: you're cursing the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. This the clearly manifest power of God. And so, without a doubt, the Pharisees did this right here. This act that you see them do right here. Now, so can this be copied? Absolutely. Can this be copied? Yes. If you were to see somebody healing somebody, or some sign that was being done. See, and see, the thing about this is that I'm going to say most of us cannot do this act because we haven't seen that. Now, don't credit it. Don't state that all of the fake healers you see out there. And if I say to the fake healers, y'all doing that, y'all acting of the devil, that's not the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, because one, what they're doing is not of the Holy Spirit anyway. Okay, the insult or whatever is not to them. Clearly, the Pharisees, in their hard heart, their hardness of heart, their hardness of heart, clearly you can see they did that. Now, if there was a true man of God that had the true gifts of the Spirit, working true signs and wonders, and let me just say that I haven't seen that today in our lifetime. I haven't seen that. I know a lot of people that claim to do it. They have these nice little, I'm going to say, playtime church services where they do it. But in terms of actual tangibility, no. We really haven't. And we know that. We play games all the time. We play games with our minds. These pastors do it, because they know that, okay, that's placebo would be too kind to say that. But we know we haven't seen it. But if a true person with a true gift that is truly working signs and wonders today was to do that, and how would we know if it was true? Because people would be actually healed. There would be actual miracles. Actual miracles. And if people were actually doing that, and I said that's of the devil, yes, I would be blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Because no other God, deity, as I said, you have seen would manifest that kind of power. And do I think that God is working miracles today? Do I think God can? I think God can. I'm just saying the people that we see is not. Let me finish up the chapter now. Verse 31 says, Then his mother and his brothers came, and we dealt with this in the last study. And his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, sent word to him and called to him. And the crowd was sitting around and told him, Look, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you. He replied, Who are my mother, my brothers? And looking around on those who were sitting in a circle around him, he said, Here are my mother, my brothers. And then he says, Whoever does the will of God is my brother, and my sister, my mother. So again, some of this, when how we use the phrase, you can't make some of this stuff up, and yeah, because the Pharisees were a trip. And remember, these were the religious people. These are not atheists. You would expect this from an atheist, but these are not atheists just acting like this. These are religious people that you could say are blaspheming God. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.